The crystal chandeliers glimmered above my head like frozen fireworks, casting their cold reflections onto the polished marble floor of the Grand Lexington Hotel in downtown Chicago. The room smelled of money and ego, colognes too sharp, champagne too expensive, and conversations too calculated. I hadn't been back in this world for years, and yet, standing at the entrance of my father's 60th birthday gala, I felt like I had never left the suffocating familiarity of it all. But it wasn't the luxury or the faces that made my heart stop. It was the name tag waiting for me at the reception table. Emily Carter, the family disappointment. Printed in sleek, tiny serif font. No emotion. No irony. Just facts, apparently. The plastic card sat there, smug and indifferent, like it had every right to exist. I stared at it for a long moment, hoping my eyes had read it wrong. I blinked. Once. Then again. Still there. Still cutting. Still cruel. I could feel the blood drain from my face as my fingers hovered above it. Behind me, laughter erupted. Sharp, familiar, and unmistakably deliberate. I didn't need to turn around to know it came from Vanessa, my father's wife, the woman who made sure I was always reminded of where I stood in this family, on the outside. I looked up slowly and met her eyes across the room. She held a glass of white wine, her lips curved in a smirk that barely pretended to be polite. Her perfectly styled blonde hair caught the chandelier's light, as did the diamonds on her wrist. Her expression was satisfied. She had won something again. My hand trembled as I picked up the name tag, the plastic cold against my skin. A part of me wanted to snap it in half, to throw it on the marble floor and let the sound shatter the silence. Another part wanted to march over to Vanessa and pour her overpriced wine down her gown. But I knew better. This game had rules, and I had learned them the hard way. Vanessa always provoked in public, but if I reacted, even once, I'd be labeled the unstable one, the bitter daughter, the disappointment, just as she had written. So I smiled, small and steady, then placed the name tag back on the table. Not because I accepted it, no, but because in that moment I understood something deeper. I wasn't just putting down a name tag. I was putting down the last ounce of patience I had for this farce. I stepped past the table, head high, and walked into the lion's den. The ballroom was already full of people, politicians, CEOs, my father's old golf buddies, and new protégés. Everyone looked as if they had stepped out of a catalog. Silk gowns, tailored tuxedos, fake smiles. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, unnoticed. No one offered a greeting. No one even turned. That was fine. I wasn't here to be seen. Not yet. At the center of it all stood Richard Carter, my father. Tall, silver-haired, charming in that politician sort of way. He was surrounded by guests, holding court like a king among loyal subjects. To his left was Brielle, Vanessa's daughter, going on about her promotion at some glossy marketing firm. On his right stood Chase, her golden boy, boasting about his firm's latest deal, his tone dripping with pride. They were perfect, polished, and loud, and he beamed at them like they were everything he had ever dreamed of. Then his eyes drifted to me, just for a single second, and in that fleeting glance I saw it. Not joy, not welcome, just disapproval, and then disinterest. He turned away before I could even raise my hand, as if I didn't matter, as if I had never mattered. I let out a quiet laugh, dry, bitter. What had I expected? A warm embrace? My dear daughter, I'm so glad you're here. That version of him had died with my mother. The man before me now was nothing more than a mask built on ambition, curated family photos, and convenient narratives. I walked over to the drink table and took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. The stem felt fragile between my fingers, but I didn't let them see my hand shake. I wouldn't give them that. I wouldn't let them know that it still hurt, that I still cared, because I didn't come here to be accepted. I came here to say goodbye. I wasn't always the disappointment. There was a time, brief and warm, when I was everything to someone. Her name was Margaret, my mother, She had soft hands and a voice like quiet summer rain. She used to call me her little warrior because even as a toddler I never backed down from anything, not even the playground bullies. She'd say it with pride in her eyes and a gentle laugh that made me believe I could take on the world. My earliest memories are filled with the scent of cinnamon rolls baking in our tiny Minneapolis kitchen, with the clink of teacups on rainy afternoons, and with the way her arms wrapped around me during thunderstorms. I used to believe that love like that could never disappear, that it was the kind that stayed, the kind that outlasted even time. But I was wrong. When I was 10, cancer came like a thief in the night. It stole her slowly, not all at once. First her energy, then her smile, and eventually her voice. The last time I heard her say, "I love you," was in a hospital room where the walls smelled like bleach and the machines beeped like they were counting down to goodbye. My father held her hand, but he never cried, not even once. I thought he was just trying to be strong for me. But now, looking back, I wonder if he had already started letting her go long before she ever slipped away. She passed in early spring. The snow hadn't fully melted yet, and everything outside our house looked dead and waiting. I remember sitting at her funeral in a stiff black dress, my legs swinging because they didn't reach the floor. People patted my head and whispered how strong I was. I didn't feel strong. I felt like someone had opened up my chest and taken something I couldn't name. Only a few months later, Dad brought Vanessa home. He didn't call her his girlfriend. He said she's a friend from work. But friends don't stay overnight. Friends don't slowly start replacing the photographs in the hallway. And friends don't wear your mother's perfume, walk through your mother's kitchen, and sit in her place at the dinner table. The first time Vanessa met me, she bent down in her pristine ivory coat and hugged me with the enthusiasm of someone being watched. "We're going to be such a happy family, Emily," she said, her voice honeyed and bright. "We're going to love each other so much." I believed her. God help me, I wanted to believe her. But love, I learned, has terms and conditions in some households. It started small. She'd forget to make a plate for me during dinner parties. She'd call me Margaret by accident, then correct herself with a laugh that never reached her eyes. She bought clothes for her children, Brielle and Chase, and told me mine still fit just fine. She never yelled, never cursed. Her cruelty came in smiles and softness, always just enough to seem harmless. My father? He said nothing. He watched it all in silence and called it adjusting. By the time I was 11, I had learned to eat dinner quietly, to excuse myself early, to stop asking for bedtime hugs. I remember standing by the window once, watching the rain pour, and hearing Vanessa tell my father in the kitchen, "She's just acting out. It's normal grief. She'll grow out of it." But I didn't grow out of it. I grew around it, like vines twisting around broken wood. My grief didn't shrink. It settled, and in its place came a quiet understanding. I was no longer the center of my father's world. I was not even on the map. When Chase spilled juice all over my school project, Vanessa handed me the mop. "You're the big sister, Emily. Be responsible." When Brielle threw a tantrum at dinner, I was the one sent to my room to set an example. And on the night of my 12th birthday, when I sat waiting for Dad to come home with the cake he promised, he never showed up. He was at Chase's piano recital. Vanessa said I should understand. It was important to him. That's when the words started forming in my head. Quietly at first, like an echo I couldn't place. Disappointment, not because I had failed, but because I had become inconvenient. At 13, I stopped talking during dinner. At 14, I stopped inviting friends over. At 15, I stopped hoping he'd show up at my soccer games. And by 16, I had perfected the art of being invisible. They didn't push me away in one sudden act. They wore me down by inches, and one day I just disappeared. By the time I turned 18, I had one thing left that still felt like it belonged to me. My future. Not the kind sculpted by family dinners or holiday cards, but one I had slowly carved out on my own. My mother, ever the planner, had started a college fund for me when I was born. Every month, she set aside what little she could. My father used to tease her about it. "She's still in diapers, Margie," he'd say, laughing. "Let's worry about college when she learns to read." But Mom had just smiled and whispered to me, "One day, this will get you far away from here." It was the only thing she left behind for me that couldn't be erased. Her photos had been moved, her recipes discarded. Even her name stopped being said out loud. But that fund, those carefully saved dollars, remained. Or so I believed. Senior year came. I had applied to 5 universities and been accepted to 3. My heart was set on Northwestern, still close to home, but far enough to finally breathe. The acceptance letter arrived on a cloudy Tuesday morning, and I remember holding it in my hands like it was something holy. I carried it into the kitchen, where Dad sat reading the paper and Vanessa sipped coffee like a queen overseeing her kingdom. "I got in," I said, unable to keep the smile from my face. Vanessa looked up, one eyebrow raised. "Oh, to where?" "Northwestern," I replied. There was a pause, then a tight-lipped smile. "That's ambitious." I turned to Dad. "We can start the paperwork for the fund, right? The tuition deposit is due in 2 weeks." His paper rustled as he folded it slowly. "Emily," he said, like my name tasted foreign, "we need to talk about that." My stomach dropped. "The fund," I said, suddenly cold. "What about it?" He didn't meet my eyes. "I used it." It took a second for the words to land. "Used it?" I repeated. He nodded, calm as ever. Chase needed help with his tuition. It was an opportunity he couldn't miss. I stared at him. "That was my money." "You're smart," he said. "You'll get scholarships. You're resourceful, Emily. You always were." I felt the walls tilt. I backed up a step, as if physical space could protect me from betrayal. "Mom saved that for me," I whispered. "Every month. For me." Vanessa set her cup down, her voice syrupy as ever. "College is expensive, sweetheart. Sometimes we have to make choices that benefit the family as a whole." But I wasn't part of the family, not in the way they meant it. I walked out of that room without another word, walked straight to my bedroom, packed a single suitcase, and never looked back. There was no dramatic shouting, no final confrontation, just silence, the kind that fills a grave. I left that house with exactly $87 to my name. No plan, no safety net, just the stubborn, hollow certainty that if I didn't leave now, I never would. I took a night bus out of Minneapolis and landed in a town that smelled like diesel and desperation. I found a job waitressing at a diner off the highway and rented a room above someone's garage. I spent the first few nights sleeping with one hand on my wallet and the other clutching my acceptance letter like a lifeline. I deferred enrollment for a year to save up. I worked double shifts, cleaned motel bathrooms, took night classes at a community college to keep my momentum. I didn't ask for help. I didn't call my father. I didn't even cry. My grief had long since turned to something else, something colder, more useful. Anger can eat you alive, but if you hold it just right, it can light the path ahead. When I finally stepped onto Northwestern's campus as a freshman, I carried more than books in my backpack. I carried every night I'd gone to bed hungry, every shift where customers snapped their fingers at me like I wasn't human, every scar they gave me without lifting a hand. I carried them all, and I walked forward anyway. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like silence. I moved through my early 20s like someone trying to rebuild a house from ashes, brick by painstaking brick. There was no applause, no warm meals waiting at home, no safety nets, just a relentless rhythm of work. Study, sleep, repeat. Some nights, I couldn't remember what my own voice sounded like. Other nights, I was so tired I ate instant noodles standing up because I was too exhausted to sit down. But I kept going. I took on 3 jobs to cover rent and tuition. I cleaned offices after hours, tutored underclassmen in writing, and worked weekends at a bookstore where the heater barely functioned in winter. I rented a one-room apartment that creaked with every step and flooded when it rained. I shared walls with people I never met, heard arguments I never saw, and spent birthdays with no candles, no calls. Still, I never once considered going back. There were moments when the bitterness tried to creep in, like when I passed other students whose parents sent them care packages, who called home when they got sick, who had someone cheering in the crowd when they crossed the graduation stage. I had none of that, but I also had no illusions left. The people who should have stood beside me had made their choice a long time ago. I was never really part of their picture, just a smudge they tried to paint over. I channeled all of it, every scar, every cold night, every dismissive look, into building something they couldn't touch. By 24, I had completed my degree in human-centered design. Not only did I graduate, but I finished top of my class. A professor I once tutored in grammar became my mentor and helped me land my first freelance contract with a small tech startup. From there, I taught myself business basics through free online courses, attended every networking event I could afford, and slowly turned side gigs into steady clients. 1 year later, I registered my own business, Carter Design Studio. I almost changed the name, but part of me wanted to keep it, not to honor them, but to reclaim it, and I didn't stop there. I reinvested every dollar I earned. I learned how to pitch, how to fail, how to stand up again. I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong people once or twice, but I kept learning. I kept rising. Eventually, I hired my first employee, then a second. And within 3 years, I was running a boutique UX/UI firm that serviced clients from coast to coast. No investors, no seed money, no support system. Just grit, just me. And yet, even with all of that, no one from my family ever called. No text, no email, not even a polite Christmas card with an obligatory, "Hope you're doing well." I wasn't surprised. I didn't expect it. But that kind of silence carves its own kind of scar. Because even when you no longer need them, some part of you still remembers what it felt like to be needed, to be loved, to be someone's daughter. But that part of me had grown quieter over time. Not gone, just small. What I didn't realize back then was how closely they were still watching. Not in support, but in silence. Like critics waiting for a stumble. Each success I posted on LinkedIn, each feature in a design blog, Vanessa and her children saw them all. They never acknowledged it publicly, but mutual contacts told me enough. "Oh, your stepmother mentioned your company at a dinner once," one old acquaintance had said. She seemed surprised, actually. Said she didn't know you were doing real work. Real work. That phrase always came back, didn't it? To them, what I did didn't count unless it had a title they recognized, unless it came with a business card that said vice president or a job at a firm they'd heard of. Freelance, startup, founder, those words didn't mean success to them. They meant failure to fit into their mold. But I didn't build my life to impress them. I built it to save myself. And that, ironically, was what made it impossible for them to look away, even after everything I tried. Not often. Not with hope, but I tried. It started with a Christmas invitation. A neatly folded card arrived in my inbox 3 years after I started my company. It wasn't from my father, of course. It came from one of my aunts, one of those well-meaning relatives who always said things like, "Don't let the past ruin the family," as if the past was some rogue wave instead of a repeated choice. She wrote, "Your dad would love to see you. Everyone misses you." It was a lie. But I went. I told myself it was curiosity, maybe closure, maybe the final confirmation that I wasn't overreacting all those years ago. I wore a navy wool coat, a cream scarf, simple makeup. I looked like a woman who knew who she was. I brought a small gift. I even practiced my smile in the mirror before walking in. The moment I stepped through the door of the old family home, I felt it. That shift. Like walking into a room where you're not welcome, but too polite to be asked to leave. Vanessa greeted me with a surprised blink, followed by a slow smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Emily," she said, drawing out the syllables like they tasted foreign. "You made it." I handed her the gift. She didn't open it, just placed it on the sideboard with a distracted nod before calling out, "Brielle, look who's here!" Brielle emerged from the living room wearing a designer sweater and a diamond ring so large it could blind someone in direct sunlight. She gave me a once-over before offering a quick, "Hey," and going right back to her conversation about her wedding venue in Italy. Chase stood by the fireplace, drink in hand, bragging about the startup his friend's father had invested in, calling it entrepreneurship, while never mentioning he hadn't put in a single hour of actual work. And my father? He was standing beside the tree, dressed in one of his trademark suits, talking to a neighbor about property taxes. When he saw me, his expression didn't change, not even a flicker of emotion. He walked over, glass in hand, and said, "Still doing that freelance work, huh? No hello. No how have you been. Just that." I smiled politely, the way you do when someone insults you to your face and expects you to thank them for it. "Actually," I said, "I run a UX design studio. We just closed a contract with a Fortune 500 company." He raised his eyebrows mildly. "Well, I suppose that's something. But if you ever want a real career, I know some people." A real career. There it was again. To him, success was a suit, a desk in a building with glass walls, a title printed on a corporate letterhead. He couldn't see past that. Wouldn't see past that. I could build an empire, and it still wouldn't be enough, because it wasn't his way. That night I left early. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out into the snow without looking back. But the invitations kept coming. Birthdays, anniversaries, Brielle's engagement party, Chase's graduation. Always the same script. Always the same coldness, dressed in polite conversation. Each time I returned, I told myself I was stronger now, that I wouldn't let them touch me. But somehow it still stung. Because no matter how far I had come, they only saw who I used to be. The quiet girl in the corner, the extra place setting at the table, the daughter who didn't quite belong. They never once asked how I'd survived, how I'd built something from nothing, how I'd paid for every textbook, every dentist appointment, every month of rent on my own. No one wanted to hear that story, because to hear it would mean admitting they'd been wrong. So I stopped going. I blocked Vanessa's number, let Brielle's messages sit unread. When a cousin texted to ask why I wasn't coming to Chase's promotion party, I typed 3 words and never hit send. Because I'm done. Eventually the invitation slowed. The silence became mutual. And for a while I thought that was the end of it. Until the gala. My father's 60th birthday. The night that name tag appeared. The night they finally realized I wasn't just the daughter they'd discarded. I was the woman they underestimated. And this time, I wasn't going to walk away in silence. The music swelled around me, violins, soft jazz, chatter like distant thunder. A waiter passed with a silver tray of champagne flutes, and I took one without thinking. The crystal was cold against my fingers. I stared at the bubbles, rising and bursting one by one, the way small things always seem to disappear before anyone notices. Across the ballroom, Vanessa laughed. It was a high, practiced sound, one I had heard 1,000 times. She stood with a small group near the bar, her arm looped casually around my father's. He looked as polished as ever. Black tux, crisp white shirt, a smile carved into his face like granite. To their right, Brielle stood showing off her diamond ring to a circle of admirers, her voice rising above the others like a siren call. "Dad paid for the whole wedding," she said. "But of course, that's just what parents do when their children have potential." I took a sip of champagne, letting the bitter taste sit on my tongue longer than necessary. Potential. That word again. It had followed me all my life, but never as something I had. Only something I lacked. A standard I failed to meet. A justification for why they gave everything to Brielle and Chase, and left me to claw my way up from nothing. And yet here I was, not broken, not bitter, standing taller than ever. I heard the clink before I saw who did it, a gentle tap of crystal against glass, the signal that a speech was coming. A hush fell over the room as my father stepped forward, raising his glass. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice smooth, steady. 60 years. It's a strange milestone. Makes a man reflect. Polite laughter. A few cheers. He thanked Vanessa. He praised Brielle. He toasted Chase's recent promotion. Then he looked around and said, almost as an afterthought, "And thank you, Emily, for joining us as well. No quorums. No pride. Just inclusion for formality's sake." I raised my glass slightly in response, keeping my expression unreadable. He moved on quickly, as if hoping no one noticed how little he'd said. But I noticed. They all did. And for the first time in years, I wanted them to. So when the speech ended and the music began to swell again, I stepped forward. At first, no one reacted. Just a few curious glances. Then, slowly, the room quieted again as people turned to look at me, an interruption they hadn't expected. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just wanted to say a few words, I said, calm, collected. It's not every day you attend the birthday of the man who taught you everything you needed to know about disappointment. There was a flicker, just a flicker, in my father's eyes. I held my glass delicately, letting the stem turn slightly between my fingers. "He taught me early," I continued, "that love has conditions, that silence speaks louder than words, that sometimes being invisible in your own home is far more painful than any insult." Someone in the back shifted uncomfortably. "I used to think," I said, "that if I worked hard enough I'd earn my place here, that maybe one day he'd be proud of me." I chased that idea like a child chases fireflies, desperate, hopeful, blind. Vanessa's smile had vanished. Brielle looked confused. Chase, well, he looked bored. I smiled just a little. But then I realized I was never supposed to belong here. This family never left a seat at the table for me. So I built my own. Now there was silence, dense, heavy, charged. I looked at my father straight in the eye. "You used the money my mother saved for me to fund Chase's tuition. You told me I was resourceful, that I'd figure it out. And you know what? You were right." I took a slow sip, then lowered the glass. "I did figure it out. Without your help. Without this family. Without a single ounce of support. I put myself through school. I built a company. I created a life worth being proud of." I looked around the room, and none of you noticed, because none of you ever looked. My voice didn't tremble. Not once. Tonight, I walked in here expecting nothing. But someone, I glanced toward the reception desk, decided to give me a gift. A murmur swept through the crowd. Some had seen the name tag. Most hadn't. I stepped closer to my father. Not angry, not wounded, just done. "The family disappointment," I said softly. "That's what it said." He blinked. I smiled, cool and steady. "But I'm not disappointed anymore. Because to be disappointed, I'd have to expect something from you. And I don't." I raised my glass once more. "Happy birthday, Dad. And congratulations to everyone here." I paused, letting the moment stretch, letting them lean forward, breath held. "Because this is the last time any of you will ever see me." I turned, walked off the stage, and didn't look back. Behind me, the silence cracked like ice. I didn't hear the applause. There was none. The only sound that followed me out of that ballroom was the muted echo of my own footsteps across polished marble floors. The music had stopped. The laughter had died. And for the first time in that family's perfectly orchestrated performance, there was no script left to follow. I didn't rush. I walked calmly to the coat check, returned my glass half full of champagne, and stepped out into the cold night. Chicago wind bit at my cheeks, sharp and honest. The city moved on, unaware of the storm I had just left behind. That felt strangely fitting. I slid into the front seat of my car and sat in silence, hands resting on the steering wheel. The engine hummed to life, but I didn't drive. I just sat there, watching the hotel's glowing entrance, the shadows moving behind tall windows. Somewhere inside, they were still reeling. Vanessa would be whispering to someone, trying to regain control. Chase might already be pretending nothing happened. Brielle probably needed a drink. And my father, he would be standing exactly where I left him, stunned. He wouldn't run after me. That was never his style. But later, much later, the phone rang. I let it ring. Then came the text. Emily, come back. We need to talk. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, I woke up in my apartment to sunlight pouring through the windows like a quiet blessing. It wasn't big. It wasn't fancy. But it was mine. Every inch of it bought with effort, with late nights and early mornings and long stretches of aching silence. And finally, it felt like peace. No more fake smiles. No more carefully phrased insults. No more pretending. I made coffee just the way I liked it. Dark, no sugar, a splash of oat milk. I opened the windows, let the city noise drift in like music, and sat down at my desk. Another text came, this time from Brielle. I didn't know they'd do that. I'm sorry if you were offended. I deleted the message without reading the rest. A few days passed, then a week, then 2. Another call. My father again. I answered it this time. Not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted it to end. His voice was tired, softer than usual. Emily, I don't want this to escalate any further. I said nothing. You're still family. That word again. Family. I closed my eyes. No, dad. I was family. Past tense. A pause. Then he said, You're overreacting. And that was it. That was all I needed to hear. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply said goodbye and ended the call. There would be others who disagreed with me. Relatives who would say, But he's your father, as if biology were a free pass for betrayal. As if blood meant belonging. But I knew better. Sometimes love has nothing to do with DNA. And sometimes cutting someone out of your life isn't cruelty. It's survival. A few months later, my company landed a contract with a national healthcare provider. The press release was shared across every platform. A reporter reached out for an interview. I declined. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need headlines. All I wanted finally was quiet. And I had it. Now, when I think of my father's face at that party, frozen, pale, lips parted mid-reaction, I don't feel pride. I don't feel anger. I feel something simpler. Something lighter. Closure. The kind that doesn't come with apologies or hugs. The kind you give yourself when no one else will. He called me the family disappointment. But I was never the one who failed. He did. He failed to see me. He failed to choose me. He failed to love me when it mattered. And that's not something you ever really get back. So I moved on. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it did. And I survived anyway.